really love how Congressman Zach Space took office in January 2007. Nancy Pelosi became Speaker. The Democrats, that's almost 4 years now, have controlled Congress, and still Bush's fault. Here's a couple of things to think about. Back in January 2007, the unemployment rate in the United States was 4.6%. Today it's 9.6%, and it's really a lot higher than that because there's a lot of people that have given up looking, or they're underemployed, or they retired early. The federal deficit, the annual federal deficit in January 2007 was $151 billion. The monthly deficit this past July, the monthly deficit was $164 billion. 4 years ago, there was about 25 million people on food stamps in the United States. Today, it's almost 42 million. What we need to do is get this economy going and get people back to work. I'd rather see people have a paycheck than worry about how we're going to fund food stamps. And so that's what we've got to do. And it just amazes me when he talks about prosperity or wealth. Prosperity and wealth is really the same thing. And when I talk about prosperity or creating wealth, I'm not talking about making the wealthier and wealthier. I'm talking about making the wealth of this country where you have, when you add something of value to something that people need and want. You know, you think about this. As a farmer, I plant seed corn this spring. They harvest it right now this month. That's creating wealth because you just created something out of pretty much nothing out of that seed. And then that goes into the economy, and it does a lot of good things. And when you're creating prosperity, and the risk takers are taking that risk because they have the confidence, then that's when you have to create jobs and opportunities. But if you're more worried about how many people are on food stamps or at the soup kitchens, and worried about how much more money we can spend and bankrupt this country, don't vote for me. We're going to get this country going again and turn it around and get the economy going and get the deficit spending under control, and we're going to get people back to work because that's what restores the confidence. I have full confidence in the private sector, our risk takers, our innovators, and our entrepreneurs. When you unleash that American spirit, that's made this country great, and that's what we're going to turn around. The Keynesian economic theory does not work. They passed the deficit stimulus in February 2009. Through June, we've added $3 trillion to the debt, and we've lost 3 million jobs in the private sector. Another question? Got another question?
I would like to ask a question of people who invited me to come down here to speak. This is a three-way race. Do I have nothing to say to refute either of my candidates? I will only take 10 seconds.
I'm going to let the audience decide two things.
I will be very brief. The federal government is...
Wait a minute, there are two things.
Sorry.
First of all, that was a yes for him. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. The second thing is, I have had a request from Zach Space that he can respond to Gibbs, which means that Gibbs also needs to respond to him. That means you're going to stay here another 5 to 10 minutes.
Thank you, ma'am, and I will thank you folks for letting me say this. The federal government has no money. The federal government is broke. They've taken your money and they've wasted it. Now they want more by doing things that are not constitutionally authorized to do. We don't need subsidies for farmers. We don't need any of these things. We need the 18 things that the federal government is supposed to do. They're listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, and that is it. Thank you.
Starting to heat up now, isn't it? Okay, thank you, Helen. Thank you.
You're welcome. This is not a debate, folks, and that's the reason I hesitate.
But,
You decide.
okay, thank you. And thank all of you. Okay, there are some really fundamental differences between me and my opponents. And I want to direct my attention specifically to Bob Gibbs, who sits up here today and tells you very simplistically that the answer to all our problems is to simply lower taxes, decrease spending, and give bureaucrats off our back. That's it. I mean, that's the solution. I wish it were that easy, because I want to reduce taxes. I want to reduce spending. In fact, while Bob Gibbs was in the state Senate and in the State House, actually when he was in the State House, every year he increased spending on the budget he voted for. Every year, an average of 9.9% per year. He also voted for the largest tax increase in Ohio history. And now he's telling us the answer to all our problems is to stop spending and cut taxes. He doesn't tell you that under George Bush, unemployment went up 81% from 2000 to 2008. Look, I've asked Mr. Gibbs at least 10 times to publicly give us one difference between his policies on economics and George Bush's, and he's not yet done it. It becomes a legitimate issue. From 2000 to 2008, unemployment in this country went up 81%. In the last 5 months, unemployment has gone down 23%. You know, I'll tell you one difference that Bob Gibbs has from George Bush's policies. He don't want you to know it, but he's gone on record with this. He believes in something called the fair tax. All right, the fair tax, it's one of those words that, frankly, I think is a misnomer, unless, of course, you make more than $250,000 a year, because it's a matter of perspective. The fair tax basically represents a 23% sales tax on anything you buy. Buy a new house, 23%. Buy a gun, 23%. Buy an American flag, 23%. Buy a Bible, 23%. Buy a tractor, 23%. Virtually every economic study that's been done in America by any reputable economist will tell you that if you make less than $250,000 a year, you're going to be paying more in taxes under that archaic, regressive, and draconian formula. That's the only difference that I can see between Bob Gibbs' economic plans and the plans that were put forth by George Bush and that separated this country, or put this country where it is now. Having said all that, the Democrats don't have all the answers. Bill Clinton was in the White House when we passed NAFTA. NAFTA has been a disaster for this country. The trade with China has been a disaster for this country. Now, we've got to stop thinking about the extremes. We've got to stop talking about ideology and demagoguery and start talking about facts, getting things done, doing things right, and forget about the wealthy in this country. Don't forget them, they're important, but start worrying about the middle class, working families, children, seniors, veterans. That's the strength of this country. Not on Wall Street, not in the Pentagon, and not in the halls of Congress.
Glad you're all excited about that. Let's review this a little bit. Since Zach's been visiting Congress this last year, he's voted to raise over $1.4 trillion in new taxes on families. He voted for 13 separate tax increases totaling $700 billion, H.R. 3962 on November 7, 2009. He voted for the cap and trade. It's $200 billion cost to families, the equivalent of 15% increase in personal income tax. I can go on and on about that. But I think it's interesting to note when he brings up the fair tax. You know, he doesn't tell you that the fair tax, if it's instituted right, we would repeal the amendment that created the income tax, and all taxes at the federal government go away, and so does the IRS. And it would bring in, the fair tax, if it was done, would bring in $2 trillion of the economy that doesn't pay taxes because the underground cash economy. It would lower prices of products we buy because you would not have the cost of taxes and tax compliance in those products we buy. It would be a tax cut for every American, even the people on the lower end of the economy scale, because if you ever studied the fair tax, you would find out that they have a prepaid credit system for necessities of life. So, and it would do away, if for me to support the fair tax, it would do away with the payroll tax, Social Security, and Medicare taxes, and it would replace all that. So even people that don't pay any income taxes, because their income's so low, they still pay the 7.5% for Social Security and Medicare. So does their employer. So that keeps more money in those employers' pockets to invest in their businesses. It would bring capital. It would free up so much capital because it wouldn't be taxed. We need to move to stop taxing capital and income and and services and consumption, because when you tax capital and income, you stifle economic growth because the government is taking more money out of the risk takers to invest that money. Trade, let's talk about trade. Hammers me on trade. Well, you know, this is interesting. The Department of Commerce's own figures in Ohio, 26% of Ohio manufacturing jobs are dependent on trade, exports. Agriculture is even more so. And it's also interesting to note that blast NAFTA, okay? Now, I'm for trade and fair trade, and it's a challenge to make trade work better and be more fair. But if NAFTA is so bad, why isn't the President of the United States, he has the authority to open up NAFTA for renegotiations? He's not doing it. He's not doing it because the statistics and numbers don't show that. The reasons we've lost jobs to overseas is not because of trade policies. The reason is bad economic policies that he's supported. and that was we have the second highest corporate income tax rate in the world, soon to be the highest, because Japan's gonna lower theirs, and we're raising ours, because those bad companies out there. And the second reason is our regulatory compliance costs. And there was an interesting article about 3 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal that said that 1 out of every $3 earned by corporate America, businesses, employers, go for taxes and regulatory compliance. That's why we've lost jobs, because businesses have to, we live in a global economy, like it or not, and businesses have to be able to compete and be able to stay in business. If they can't make a product to be competitive, they're out of business. And our congressman here in early September sponsored a bill with no co-sponsors called the VOTE Act, where he wants to make it a referendum, everybody have to vote in any trade agreements. So that he's putting up a protectionist, isolationist wall around this country by that kind of policy, and that will just get us in trouble. We will lose jobs. And you go talk to the employers, and I've talked to a lot of employers in the 18th Congressional District, and some will tell me if NAFTA were to go away, they have to lay off anywhere from some of them 30% of their employees, some as high as 50%. So what we need to do in trade, 2 things. When a foreign government is subsidizing an industry or sector, and those products come over here, we do need to slap a tariff on them and make a level playing field, because no American company, employer should have to compete with a foreign government. And the second thing that gives me heartburn is China. China does not let their currency float. That gives them a huge competitive edge, okay? But the problem this goes back to the federal deficit spending. China's our banker. It's pretty hard to go to your banker and tell them to quit doing this. We can't negotiate with our banker anymore. And so the real problem in this country is spending, and they want to spend more and more and more. And I'll give you an example before I shut up. Here a few weeks ago, Nancy Pelosi called them back to spend another $26 billion. Now, Zach put out a press release, his daily press release, blasted me that I didn't support. He assumed I did, but he said it was deficit neutral. Here's how it's deficit neutral. $10 billion of that $26 billion, they're going to raise taxes on American companies that happen to do business overseas. Bright idea. Second, that was sarcastic. Second, $16 billion of the $26 billion is they're going to cut food stamps in 4 years. Okay, well, I really don't believe they're going to do that. But think about that. That would be like one of us going out and buying a boat that we can't afford, so we find the money, we borrow the money, but we justify in our own minds because in 4 years from now we're going to spend less. That's the insanity that people are running this country. And what we need to do, they didn't pass a budget this year, they passed what they call CRs, continuing resolutions. Means that, well, we just keep the government running, we don't have a blueprint to know where we're going, but we're spending more money. So, and it just amazes me when they come out and say, the reason the stimulus hasn't worked is because it wasn't big enough. It's nearly $1 trillion, it wasn't big enough in a $15 trillion economy. I don't know what else to say, but I think you got the message there. Thank you.
I would like to thank all the candidates for coming today and thank the audience.